Posted by Bo Delta. One night with a Ouija turned me from a skeptic into a believer. Twice in my life I've used a Ouija board. The first time I did it, it didn't seem to work all that well. The board was a bit dodgy, and there was one person in the group who I was certain was moving the glass for theatrics. I couldn't prove it, but I had my doubts. The answers to the questions were sketchy at best and not all of them made sense. The one thing that maybe might have proved it was real was that I remember for weeks after we did it, our cat at the time would sit just outside the doorway and stare, right in the direction of where we had set it up. We all noted that it was kinda weird as he'd never done that before, but he eventually stopped and we forgot about it and moved on. Perhaps we did make a connection and our setup was just wrong, or our etiquette was off. Either way, I remained largely unconvinced that we had contacted actual spirits. The second time though was an entirely different outcome. A few years later and I'd moved across the country to attend university. One day me and some of my uni friends got on the topic of Ouija and decided we'd have a crack at it one night. But this time we'd do it properly. One of my friends was quite an esoteric sorta guy and he did some research on how to properly do it. None of the others besides me had tried Ouija at this point, so we were mostly going in blind, but my friend made us a proper board setup and even used a sage smudging stick to cleanse the room of bad energies, as he put it. Once that was done, the four of us sat down and got to it. I will mention here that I was still very skeptical, so I went in with the mindset of carefully observing the other guys to see if they were messing with the glass at all, but throughout the entire session the movement was so fluid and precise that all my doubts quickly evaporated and I was genuinely astounded that there was a supernatural entity interacting with us throughout this entire session. But that wasn't the only reason I started believing. The conversation we had with the spirit was so clear and yet so bizarre that I'll remember it forever. One thing my esoteric friend said was paramount to the experience was courtesy, so we started off basically asking if there were any spirits available to speak to us, and when we got a yes we introduced ourselves and asked it if it wouldn't mind speaking to us for a bit, another yes. We apologized for intruding and made it clear that the spirit did not have to answer any questions it didn't want to, and then we began our questioning in earnest. I won't type out a transcript, but here's the basics. The spirit we were speaking to was a soldier, killed in 1984, and he was from Yemen. He quite enjoyed the afterlife, or wherever he was at the time. He made it very clear to us that death was not the end, and there was nothing for us to fear in the afterlife. He said the concept of heaven and hell were untrue. He also said reincarnation was possible. I then remember asking if it was a Buddhist style of reincarnation, to which we received a yes/no. I interpreted that as a sort of. After all this, we then decided amongst ourselves to wrap things up, having already had our minds blown away by what we just experienced. We said thanks to the spirit and wished it all the best. We also waited for the spirit to say goodbye to us. This was an important part according to my friend, as it would allow the spirit to return to its own realm easily. And that was it. I walked out of that room with a strange feeling of bewilderment and yet also enormous relief. If what the spirit said was true, and I had no reason to believe it was lying to us intentionally, then death was almost something to look forward to. I considered myself a pure atheist up until this point, but this one night rattled that belief so hard that I no longer consider myself as such, and will always have the memory of my Yemeni friend to prove otherwise. Posted by Random Average Human. My friend told me he died and it was going to be okay in a dream experience. This isn't perfectly how it went because it was 2 years ago, and I'm only going back to this because I saw someone had the same experience. Just a little background: 3 years ago my friend I knew since birth was diagnosed with leukemia, and after an intense and scary year-long battle the cancer won. I'm tearing up just writing this, I miss him so much. So I was eating some food, in the dream, and my friend rang the doorbell. He had his hair and he looked so nice, and he looked happy and said I had a life I was going to live and I couldn't live it. I want you to live a life and enjoy it. He smiled a bit and shrugged and said, hey, it'll be okay without me. I'll miss you too up there, but don't worry about me, the pain is gone. He went in for a hug and we hugged for what felt like eternity. I love you, man, he said, as his parents' car door opened, and I yelled, Mark, don't leave me, live, asshole. He just looked at me, and laughed and said, sorry man, I got to go. And I screamed and screamed, don't leave me, but he got in and the car drove into the street, which was a bright blue light, his favorite color, and the second the car got engulfed. I woke up crying and screaming, just as my mom got home walking in crying and said Mark died. And I just said crying I know, and I cried for the day, but it felt better being able to say goodbye. God, I miss him. Posted by Throwaway 418603. Something saved me from being hit by a truck. I still have no idea how to explain this, but I'll tell exactly the way my mom told me multiple times before. When I was around 4 or 5, I had a babysitter that would stay home with me during the day while my mother was working. I always insisted on waiting for my mom in front of the building we lived in, which was located near a factory that sold/recycled plastic. My nanny was always holding my hand pretty tightly to prevent me from running towards the street, since the factory was always getting trucks coming and going with supplies. That particular day, she got distracted talking to a neighbor, and apparently I saw my mom waiting to cross the street and decided to run towards her. As a truck was approaching, I let go of the nanny's hand and ran, and my mother said she closed her eyes and screamed because a truck was so close by that there was no way someone could save me. As she closed her eyes, she begged God and a saint, don't remember which one, to save me, and when she opened her eyes I was standing next to her, confused AF as to why she was crying and shaking. The truck driver got out screaming and looking for me under the truck. He was certain he had hit me. My mom asked me what happened, and I simply said a lady helped me cross the street, and I pointed to that said lady, but there was no one there. I still don't know how I feel about this. It wasn't my last experience with paranormal stuff. A lot happened when I moved in with my grandma, who lived in a very old house, but it sounds so movie-like. A guardian angel? I don't know. Posted by Lord Off Flies. Beelzebub grandfather helped me from beyond. This story may feature some triggering points around sexual assault and unexplained death. Please don't read it if you're uncomfortable with those, and please take care of yourself. 3 months ago I was sexually assaulted by someone senior to me at work. Aged 19 myself, and the person who did it being 53. It was a shit day. I reported it as soon as he was away from me, and headed home. It's a short drive. But every second all I could think was every moment takes you further away. I got home, and when I was asked why I was wrong, it all came out. Fast forward to 3 days later, and I was anxious, crying at everything and convinced the person would be angry I reported it and come after me. I'd made it to around 2 a.m. and couldn't sleep. I was sobbing in my bed. Now here is where I have to explain the layout of my room. I have a string of fairy lights over my bed, with pegs that hold pictures. The one above where I was holds a picture of my grandfather. The window was closed, as was the door. There are no radiators or fans. My grandfather passed away unexpectedly when I was 3. It was only recently revealed how. And I cannot tell people how, as I know my family are very concerned about it. But let's say it was abrupt and caused a lot of pain for everyone. I relate to my grandfather the more I hear about him. But I don't remember him well at all, but often catch myself wishing I could ask his advice or speak with him. I'm laying in my bed, and I notice the fairy lights swaying like they would if caught in a breeze. But there's no breeze. I see his picture and feel an urge to grab it. When I do, it stops swaying and I feel a sense of complete calmness. I take it down from the peg and just sit a while staring at it. I get the feeling someone is sat by me. You know how you feel the blanket stretch when someone sits on your bed? And I felt more comfortable than I had in a long time. Like I knew no matter what everything would be okay. I genuinely can't explain it. I'd tried sleep tea, ambience, anxiety medicine, distraction. Everything, and all of a sudden it just stopped. And slowly, over the next few days I felt better. I could be imagining it. Please don't think I'm crazy. But I genuinely feel like someone or something, most likely my grandfather, was there. Posted by Jkarenza 67. My mom had to move. After my mom and dad divorced, she was looking for a new house in the paper and found a really cute house, on a hill, overlooking the lake. 665 Lake Forest. It was a house built in the 60s. Half of it sat on stilts and a basement on the bottom that was holding it up. Was kind of built into the side of the hill with a wraparound porch. Up top was 2 bedrooms and 1 bath, small living room and kitchen. The strange thing was the whole front of the house was 3 sliding glass doors as opposed to walls. Weird, but got a good view of the whole lake. Anyways, my mother, sister and I loved the house. Even the dogs loved it. It was built well and cheap for my mother to afford. But the longer we lived there, the weirder and creepier things became. My sister and I would call it 666 Lake Forest Drive as a joke. We would wake up in the morning and the fridge door would be wide open. Things from the kitchen would just end up on the porch or downstairs on the lawn, spoons, cereal, condiments, etc. My mom would get really mad at us, even though we swore up and down that we would never do that. I tried to convince her it was ghosts, but she didn't believe in them. My mom didn't believe us, until one night she bursts into our room while we were watching TV. Screaming at us. She turned off our television and said, "Stop banging on my bedroom door, I'm trying to sleep." My sister and I were dumbfounded. We promised that we didn't do anything. But before she could continue, we heard loud banging on her bedroom door. My mom rushed into the living room and we followed behind. The banging continued as we all just stared at the door, the hairs on our arms sticking straight up. The banging looked like it was coming from inside her room. When it finally stopped, my mom just stood there with a confused and terrified look. My sister and I started blabbing about how this explains all the weird stuff that has been going on around the house. Finally, she believed us that the house was haunted. Suffice to say, we all slept in the same room that night. My mom decided to look into the backstory of the house and found out that in the early 70s, the house lit on fire when someone left the oven on. It happened at the end of a house party, when everyone was asleep. If I remember correctly, 6 people died. Someone bought it and ended up repairing it. Then would rent it out to people. My mom contacted him and he said that some renters reported that it was haunted. But he brushed it off, because he never experienced it. We dealt with it cause it was cheap for my mom and there wasn't any other nice houses for this price. So we stayed. But then it just got worse and worse. One night I wake up to my sister weeping really quietly. It was pitch dark. Freaky as fuck. So I whispered to her, "What's going on? Are you okay?" She then freaks out and starts screaming. I jump up and flip on the light and I rush over to her bed. She looks terrified and when she sat up, there was a chunk of her hair left on the pillow. Some of her hair had been ripped out. She starts mumbling and stammering that there were people, covered in burns, standing around her bed staring at her. Claims that when I spoke, they lunged at her and grabbed her head. Almost every night after that she would wake up and feel them staring, but she never dared open her eyes again. About a month later I was watching a movie, in the living room, at around 8:30. The TV was the only light in the room. I felt safer cause my chocolate lab, Blue, was hanging out with me. I was laying on the couch, staring at the TV, when I saw something crawl up out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was my dog, so I reached back to pet him but my arm went straight through the figure and turned ice cold. Then I noticed my dog was on the other side of the room. Chills ran through my whole body as I turned to face this figure. It was human looking with charcoal skin on all fours and its eyes were melted, running down its face. As soon as I screamed it puffs into smoke and disappears. My mom and sister come running and I tell them what happened. We were extremely scared. The last straw was when my mom was home alone in her room and it was broad daylight. Something quietly knocks on her door, my mom calls out, "Who's there?" Then on the other side she hears one of our voices saying, "Mom?" So she rushes out and no one is there. She shuts the door and starts to head outside the house. She then hears a knocking, on her bedroom door again. Then she hears, in my sister's voice, "Mom? Mom? Mom?" Deep voice moom. She bolts out the door, onto the porch, and starts hearing banging on all the glass doors. Cabinets opening and slamming, in the kitchen. Things flying around. When it finally stops, she goes inside slowly and sees the house is trashed. The oven burners are on and paper towels are all on top of it, starting to catch fire. She puts it out and goes back outside to call the landlord. A few days later we move out and have never experienced anything supernatural since. If you don't believe me. I saw this shit with my own eyes. Gave me chills just writing about it, reliving it in a sense.